Ginige, Yama, Wai, Kaya, Wayabi, Mambala, Yinabi Liji, Delgi Naka Yindidi, Guatemala, and Whichway. Ginige, Guri Yari, Nainirre David, Naya Guri Arria Glostera, Naya Arria Wormai Birpai Guri. Hello, my name's David Parsons, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the Wallatuka building. Before we start, I'd like to point out the Jilawers. Mun and Yun can be found down this corridor to your left, and same upstairs. And if you don't mind just turning your phones on silent, if that's possible. Now that's out of the way, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, the Pamelong clan of the Wabakal people, the land that we stand on and sit on, the air that we breathe, the water that surrounds this beautiful country, are sacred to all people. I'd like to further my acknowledgement to the knowledge holders and elders past and present, and emerging generations, since they are our history, our now, and our future. I'd like to also extend my acknowledgement out to the Worimi, Biripi and Wanarua nations, as this is the footprint of the University of Newcastle. I'd also like to acknowledge the elders in the room today and online, as they are our knowledge holders of our culture. So on behalf of the Wallatuka Institute, the staff and students of the Muuya Banggi program, we welcome you. And how can we describe the language is something that kind of comes to my mind. In an age where technology is such a big platform for conversing and talking to everyone, I was told a story not too long ago about our old people talking about telephones and described them as flying breath. I think the breath, and by extension our voice, can be heard flying across the country, especially today with you online. I'd now like to welcome you to the Muuya Banggi Symposium, and hopefully you enjoy and get something out of today. So I'd like to invite Nathan Towney, the Pro Vice Chancellor of Indigenous Strategy and Leadership, up to the stage to give an introduction. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, David, and hi, everyone. I feel really honoured to be here today for such an important symposium. My name's Nathan Towney. I'm a proud Wiradjuri man from Wellington, New South Wales. I'd like to also acknowledge the traditional custodians, the land that we're on today, the Pamelong clan of the Awabakal people. Pay my respects to elders past and present, and also acknowledge the homelands of everyone here today. A big thank you to Dr. Ray Kelly and to Kua Swan who are the brains trust behind this symposium, and also for their strategic thinking about what's the university's role in language revitalisation, because it is a really important part of the university's plan moving forward. And I'd just like to thank them for their vision and their strategic thinking around how we can get this out to the community and engage people in this such important work. They've asked me today just to give a little bit of an overview and a snapshot of what the university's commitment to Indigenous education and research actually looks like, and the role that events like this symposium play in that commitment. So earlier this year, the university launched a new strategic plan called the Looking Ahead Strategic Plan. And you can see on the screen here that there's some very big focus areas. And wrapped around those focus areas is the Indigenous commitment. And it's something that the university don't take lightly. And it's great to be part of an executive team that actually want to learn and want to know what they can do in their role to drive that Indigenous commitment to Indigenous education and research. So I'm just going to unpack a little bit about what that means for us as a whole university. So the Vice-Chancellor basically asked me to coordinate a team to come together and develop a strategy moving forward. And we've come up with 4 pillars that's going to drive that Indigenous commitment. The first is around cultural knowledge and understanding. So building the cultural knowledge and understanding, building capacity of all of our stakeholders that engage with the university. So the two big pieces of work there are the staff. So really trying to think strategically about how we build the cultural knowledge and understanding of our staff. And obviously the other big stakeholder are our students. So how do we ensure that every graduate of this university has a level of cultural knowledge and understanding that is going to make them better at whatever they do when they leave this place? The second pillar is around participation and retention. So making sure that we have strategies to engage with more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as students, as staff members, as community. When I talk about students, I talk about all levels, undergraduate, postgraduate, PhD students. We need more Indigenous-led research, and to do that, we need a strategic approach to move our undergraduate students into those postgrad and HDR research areas. The third is research and research to influence change. How do we ensure that we have more Indigenous-led research? What can we do to build the capacity of our Indigenous academics and researchers so that we have more grants and we have more influence in our communities, led by Indigenous people, working and engaging with our communities as partners in that research? Another big piece of that work is some work that we're doing with Terry Jenke around Indigenous cultural intellectual property, which is also very important. And the fourth pillar there is reconciliation through community collaboration. So not only updating and enhancing the university's reconciliation action plan, but we see that there's a role for us to play in coordinating a response to reconciliation action plans for the region. So working with industry, providing opportunities for our students, and doing all of that in consultation with our communities. So they're the four pillars. The pillar that I wanted to talk a little bit about, which is where this symposium really fits, is under our research pillar and research to influence change. To drive this pillar, we'll be developing an Indigenous research strategy. Part of my work is I've just conducted an analysis of all the Indigenous research strategies that exist within Australia and also around the globe. So looking particularly at Canada and New Zealand and the work that they're doing around Indigenous research, and looking at opportunities to partner with other universities from across the globe. And that's really going to drive the work that we do. So there's also some areas that we've highlighted that we actually want to focus our research in. And I've listed them on the screen, but I think the important thing is not to think of those themes in isolation. It's about how do we ensure that the cross-discipline approach to those research areas influence each other. So today we're here to talk about language, but in this space I'm really keen to make sure that language also has a role to play in our health research. It also has a role to play in our education research. And it also has a role to play in our ecological knowledge research, because we can't separate something that Dr. Ray has talked to me a lot about. We can't separate country and language. They are so intertwined. And when we learn about country, we learn about language. And when we learn about language, we learn about country. And so I'm really excited about the strategic approach that the university is taking, and the work that we have undertaken in all those areas, and how we're going to bring those research themes together. And I think today is such a really important part of that. And I'd just like, again, to congratulate everybody involved, thank everyone in the room and online that has taken the time to dial into such important work, and I wish you all the best for today. Thank you.
So thanks, Nathan, for showing the importance that language has for Indigenous people, not only across Australia but across the world, and showing that the university cares about going forward and taking the right step forward. And it also shows that the Indigenous way is holistic, whether that comes to language, health, or any other aspect of our culture. So now I'd like to bring up Kua Swan, a Gomeroi and Wiradjuri man, who has been working with Uncle Ray with the Muuya Banggi program, and give you an oversight of what we have done this year. So.
Thanks, David. So yeah, my name's Kua Swan. I'm a Gomeroi and Wiradjuri man from little reserve just outside of Muuya and 32 acres, a Rambi mission on the Wiradjuri side. So first off, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we meet on today as well. I'd pay my respects to the Pamalung clan of the Awabakal Nation and pass that acknowledgement on to elders past, present and emerging, and any elders we have here in the room with us today. So this year was a bit of a step out of what I'm used to doing. I come from a health background. When I was offered the role here at Wallachuka, I'd seen potentially a chance to form some identity for our mobs. Through the research into the language that I have done, I can already see the change in myself with my own personal identity as a Aboriginal man. For me, it was a bit of a daunting process to step into a language space, but from working with Ray, I seen the potential of my own knowledge being brought to the table, and my own journey through the language spaces being represented and acknowledged and held as knowledge that is appreciated within the language space. So I had a brief, what I thought was not much knowledge on language, but as I moved through the year, I seen that the things that I actually knew were playing a vital role in renewing language. So even within my name, Kua, it is an Aboriginal name. It means Spirit of the Dingo. Some of the things that we had put together were based on what we actually know as a people to move forward. So Ray has given a concept of Aboriginal English, and that's something that I took really close notice of, where I've seen that sort of language spoken throughout my life, everywhere I've been. So I've seen language in many parts of the country. As a kid, I grew up as far away as Darwin and all through the Northern Territory, down through Queensland and a lot of New South Wales. And through that journey, I had picked up on words from each different language group, and I still use them today with my kids. So the hesitation moving in, I didn't realise that I actually had that knowledge, and it was something that I needed to bring to the table. And to see that knowledge appreciated really gave me a sense of pride that my identity was pretty strong. That leads into the health aspects with what Nathan was saying. But from there, I decided that it was time to take a bit of focus and see where we actually wanted to go this year within running a class. The first step, we were running a methodology from Professor Stephen Greymorning. When we were doing that, we noticed that there was some challenges and more techniques that we had to represent through our language program. So obviously, COVID hit. We decided that we'd have to keep pushing through and start trying to elevate our knowledge a little bit more to move through what seemed like an impossible task. So we brought together a group online and started making some documents and transcripts to help people move into language. And what we did through there was we started out with giving people a little bit of a taste into language through the trill drill. this is something we created to help people work through the techniques that the mouth needed to do to produce language and pronounce some certain words. That was something that was pretty tricky for a lot of people to begin with, just to be able to roll their R's. But I was lucky enough to be able to do the rolling of the R's through the technique with my brother's name. My brother's name is Bayanangara Marangi, and the rolling of the R's was kind of a simple task for me. But I seen the way people were hesitant and had to develop that technique. So me and Ray got together and we organised this drill. It was just a little 15-minute drill that we'd ask people to go through 15 or 10 minutes before class to warm up their tongue, so to speak, and get through that little barrier. As we moved forward, we started seeing that there was more and more techniques that the mouth happens to do when speaking language. So that led me to make some diagrams and make some practice sentences to feed out to our group. But one thing we didn't count on in going through with the group was that their knowledge had to be appreciated as well and brought to the table and help produce some kind of understanding of the language. So within that, I had a pretty tough time in putting the pieces of the puzzle together within my own headspace. But from there, I learned that I had to look elsewhere to other languages that do the same sort of thing, the same word order, the same structure type thing. I didn't get it all from one language group, but I can say that from the many different language groups that I did look at, such as Spanish, French, a bit of Japanese in there, it helped that idea sit within my head that other cultures are using these techniques and their word orders are so different to English. So even from doing that sort of thing, I felt the need to explain to people within the group that we can't keep falling back to English to translate this language or even to help us develop it. And even from there, I seen there was a need to take on another approach to really look at our culture as well as all our different forms of communication. So like you're going to see today, we're going to see a bit of song demonstrations from Jesse Hoggett, I think that's his name, Hodges. And a bit of sign language from Rodney Adams. But from there, that led me into see what else can help us renew language. We come to the point where we start thinking outside the box, start looking past what is on paper and really using our own knowledge and our own thought process to get through what seemed like an impossible task for me probably 13 months ago. From what I've seen and have brought to this Muuya Banggi language group, we started out as a class, but I think everybody in the class turned from student to teacher at some point, and I think that really embodies what Aboriginal culture is about. Learning from each other and accepting and acknowledging other people's input and moving forward in that sense. So the culmination of all of that sort of work has led us here today to Muuya Banggi, and what I had hoped we could try to replicate on a bigger scale is that that level of collaboration we had in our class to take into consideration all of these different forms of communication and bring that to the table and start the conversation around where do we go next. So yeah, I think today we're going to see a video from Jesse in a sec, and hopefully you guys can start thinking about language the way I've started to think about language. I think we're ready for the video. Thank you. There you go.
Are you recording?
Yeah.
Okay. Yamagaro, my name's Jesse Hodgetts. I'm a Ngiyampaa Wiradjuri man, born and raised on Central Coast on Darkinjung country, but regularly connect with my homelands and ancestral country. So I'm doing a PhD on archived songs, on archived Ngiyampaa songs, Wiradjuri songs, how they would connect to each other, and how we can revitalise them and revitalise their song styles to support our oral history, our continuation of corroborees, our continuation of ceremony, our continuation of language and story. So how can these song styles support that to empower our identity today? So this particular presentation is on how do I notate these songs and describe them in an academic context, and why do I do it, and how am I doing it? So the area that I'm studying on my mob is Wiradjuri and Ngiyampaa. Now Ngiyampaa is the language up here, and the two dialects are Wangaipon and Walawan. So I've got sort of ancestral ties to sort of all three countries here. And within that, within the Ngiyampaa, you've got different geographical clan groups. So you've got the Nilikilo, the Bawangai, Galerkilo, Bilarkilo, Garokilo, and the Garokilo goes up into Cobar, all out to about around Byrock under Bookaways. My mob probably more associated with the Bogan River, which is really kind of a transition between Walawan, Wangaipon, Wiradjuri, hence why I'm studying both language groups, because there's songs that are in both languages and they connect with each other. And I always like to ground myself in my research as to what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, what I'm obligated to, because I'm not obligated to any, not necessarily obligated to any professional, personal reasons. It's more, I've been put here for a reason by my own mob and my ancestral ties to these languages and these songs. So this here is my great-grandfather, Henry Shipp. My mother's Sharon Hodgetts, and her mother is Anita Caesar Shipp, and that's her father. And his mother, Ada Shipp, that one there, she was born around Nyngan on the Bogan River, and she got married in Cobar, and then eventually they settled in Dubbo. Why there's a lot of ships at Dubbo now. And Henry Shipp there, my great-grandfather, is his sister married this old fella, Stuart Gordon from Brewarrina. So, you know, a lot of marriage ties, kinship ties. They would visit each other a lot, share a lot. And within our oral history, Ada Shipp was a fluent speaker of both Wangaipon and Wiradjuri. And Henry Shipp was somewhat of a speaker, mainly of Wiradjuri, because that's sort of the land he was living on at the time around Dubbo. But he didn't speak it much. And it says, you know, it was the times, as a lot of you know, around those times in the 40s, 50s, 60s, it was dangerous to speak language. So that wasn't passed on, and it's something that's there's a lot of shame in that now, not having that language when I sit with my nana. But luckily for me, she's kept me strong in my identity. And this old fellow knew songs too. He knew old songs, old traditional songs in lingo. So for me, I have an inherited sort of link to that. And today I've got more links with people like the Gordons and Williams and things that are still doing corroborees. So this is why I do what I do, why I'm doing it. So we can all have that back and have our identity back. So I'll just give you a little bit of a background of the country before we get into the songs and the language and the analytical stuff about Ngiyampaa and Wiradjuri country. This is the famous Brewarrina fish traps, where a lot of different mobs gathered from the Ualaroi, the Milaroi, Wiradjuri, Wongaipun, Balawan, Murawari. They all gathered there for, well, the fish supported them, but they were gathering there for ceremonial reasons, lots of reasons, business. That's Umbi Umbi Mountain, known today by the white fellows as Mount Oxley. That's one of our big ancestors that travelled from the east. It's a Thickerbilla. A Thickerbilla is an echidna. So she's a mother echidna that travelled from the east and fell asleep there. So I'm just giving you this background so you can see what's important about who we are and what the songs really mean. And when we sing the songs and hear the songs, what we're thinking about from a Ngiyampaa perspective, more so than from an academic perspective. And then for me to sort of navigate through academia and sit in the middle or cross the two worlds, which the other reason why I'm here too, I should say as well, I've had some really good mentorship, and just on that crossing of two worlds, Uncle Ray Kelly being not only a PhD supervisor, but a cultural mentor as well that helps you navigate those two worlds. So as I started studying this stuff, I was always a singer first, a guitarist, a musician, a teacher, and then probably more in my adult life got far more into the dancing side and the cultural dancing. So when I found these songs recorded at IATSIS, which a couple of people put me on, Uncle Ray Kelly for one, I was speaking to Uncle Paul Gordon from Brewarrina, and I said, how do we learn our old language? What do you think is the best way to learn our old language in songs? And he said, no, not from a book. He said, well, oral history, but he said, go find them recordings, and you'll hear it spoken. So that way we're not hearing a filtered down, colonized interpretation of dead white people. So we're actually hearing the old people speak it. So I got his idea and I saw what Uncle Ray did in his methodology as, well, it's an indigenized academic methodology. So I found these songs, Ngiyampaa songs recorded. So this is one about the porcupine, echidna, Thickerbilla, recorded by Louise Hercus in Derriton. That could be Victoria. It's right down south in New South Wales. There's a lot of Ngiyampaa people that moved there, but it was sung by John King and Ernie King as well. And it was a song made by old Mulbong Johnson, who was a Galiapilu man from the Lachlan River. I better, actually, before I keep playing this, I better check that you can hear it because, hang on, share screen, share computer sound. All right, you'll be able to hear it now. You should.
This is another song they made. Yeah, about this porcupine. Yeah.
Poor old fellow was slipping at the end there. You know, they were pretty old by that stage, and the songs hadn't been sung much. And that's a pretty tricky rhythm too. But I remember when I first heard these, and I'd learned corroboree songs already that had been passed on, and been even new ones that had been made, newly composed songs, I guess, dances. I remember hearing these, and it gave me chills. You know, something about them that was different, that had this, I don't know how to explain it, inherited chain to them. And it was a feeling in me. And some songs I've listened to back, and it made me sort of cry because of the feeling that I get from them. So they've got something, you know, the songs have got something, and we want to have that something because it's who we are. We are these songs, it's our ancestors. And so notating them was weird. Notating in the Western musical notation, I go, why do I need to do this? Because I just thought that's what you had to do because every other Indigenous musicology study was doing that. I thought, well, sure, why do I need to do that? That's not the purpose, which I'll get more into in a couple more slides. Here's another version of it. This is a little bit different that time. This is, I shall skip that one because I'm probably done too long. This is a song by Fred Biggs, who was a recognised song person from Crow, I think, which was the mumbling Billard Kielu people, the Kazarine Tree people.
This is song about the crow.
So, like, you can hear the descent of the pitch, you can hear them big breaths, you can hear all these intricacies that Western musical notation and techniques don't really recognise so much. So this is that old Fred Biggs. He was recorded, luckily, by Jeremy Beckett, anthropologist, at Murrum Bridge, where they all sort of got moved to. That's his son-in-law, Tom Clark. And then that's that old John King there sitting by the river at Derriton with another fellow named Joe Smith. And there's descendants today of these people too that are quite excited about this material, about them being revived as well. So that's an ongoing conversation that we're having about how we do this. There we go. So when I listen to these songs, there's Western music elements that are important in Western music that are not so important to Ngiyampaa and Wiradjuri songs. And they are, like, these singers aren't trained in Western music. They're not thinking, I've got to stay in key. They're not thinking, sing that C and that B flat. And they're not thinking, not counting 1, 2, 1, 2. They're not thinking like that. They're not, so constantly or consistently staying in key is not important. Strictly singing within a scale of pitches, like the major scale, is not important. Or even a 12-note chromatic system, not important. Strictly singing within a meter, not important, because they'll stop and they'll start and they'll change the song for the dancers. So these things, if I was to notate it into Western music, I'm changing it already. By placing them into grids of 12 notes, it's changing the music. And that's not what we need to do. What we're trying to do is gain back the sound of our ancestors, not colonize the songs. We don't want to colonize the songs and put him into the colony's notation system is colonizing the songs, in my opinion. If there was another purpose, if we were trying to contemporize the songs and we're putting guitar to it, or we wanted to sing them in a modern choir or something, maybe there might be a purpose for that. But I just realized there's not really a purpose for it, for what I'm trying to do. But what is important, what are some things in Western music that is identifiable in these songs that maybe they are thinking about? Well, lyrics and phrasing, beat, rhythm, pitch, structure, the different sections of the song, the tone of how he sings, and his expressive techniques. So there's the things that I can actually identify and talk about within these songs that are important, that I probably do think about. Once again, these are they're English words. It's still Western music, so I still don't really want to use them words. I want to use our words. I want to use our ways of thinking about it as an empire man and stay sovereign the way we think and the words we use and the language that we use. So what I've done is taken these concepts, Western music concepts, and gone, well, what words would we use? What are some Ngiampaa words that we would use and how do we think about it? And I come up with this. This is kind of translated, and this is our words. And these are either actual words that I've heard them use when talking about singing and dancing, or words that I've had to adapt based on what I've been taught culturally. So the Ngia, that means words. It means talking. So that's the words and the phrasing. The Borpi, which means the beat. Borpi, interestingly, also means your belly. There is a relationship there. The Wakaima means to sing, but it also means to make dance. So that's like the rhythm of the singing that makes you want to dance. The Balimatakun, now this is an interesting one. So Balimatakun means sky and the ground. So when I'm talking about the movement of the melody and how high and how low it goes, which you usually talk, in Western music, you usually talk about scale and C, D, E, F, G, etc., which has no relevance for us. When we're thinking about going up and down, we're thinking about an energy that moves up and down. We're singing up high, we're singing up low, we're connecting to different energy, different spirits. So for me, that's sky and ground. The mar, that's like the body of the song, the structure, the parts of it. When do you want to sing this part? When do you want to sing that part? Which dances, what steps do the dancers do to each section? Because I'll change steps for different sections, which I'll talk about. The ngantal is the breath and the life of the song. And the yui is the name of the ancestor and how to represent its sound. So Ngia, the words. That Tikirabilla song that you heard before from King, originally by Muuya Johnson, about being tracked, it's porcupine of being tracked. They're the words there. Ngaratal karinga tikartalanga, maratal pa tunia kalai turo karinga. And then the next section, ngana yana ya yana gona Malay. Now, this was really hard to translate. And when Tamsin Donaldson, the linguist that recorded Archie King, was another person related to the singers, she recorded him trying to translate this song. And he sort of translated bits and pieces of it because it was hard to translate. In some words, he'd say, oh, that's a Ngiampaa word. And in other words, oh, that's a Wiradjuri word. So Thikabilla is I've never really seen that recorded amongst Wiradjuri people. It's not in the book or anything. It's a Ngiampaa word. But then later on, he says, Thorokal. He goes, that's a Wiradjuri word. But Thuro can mean snake or a track. So Thorokal. So whether this is sort of more older language, I don't know. But it's hard to translate, but I kind of get an idea about what it's about. So he's tracking a porcupine throughout Isla Duni, that's the sun, either all day, he's tracking all day, or he's following west. Which Duni means you don't know where he went into. And then the next section, means that there he went and he turned around and went back to where he come from. So, no, you could see him, sorry. You could see where he went, and he went backwards, back to where he come from, because that's what they do, back to their burrow. And you also got to consider their backwards feet that they have. So that's the Muuya, the lyrics. Next part is the Burpi. Now, old Eliza Kennedy, a very important Ngiyaparl woman who helped us record the language, well passed on now, but she did so much work recording the language. A married couple used to sing their song for them. He kept up with the boomerang. He kept up with the song with his boomerang. His woman beat time, so Burpi, beating time. So it's a word they use for beating. And that's old Fred Biggs there, who was their main singer, and his wife, Nancy Biggs, who sung together. So he would have used the balka, the boomerang, and she would have probably beat on maybe a possum rug or a pillow or even roof skin wrapped up or clothes on the ground to get that sort of thud. That's the burpi. That's the beat underneath the song. So what I did is I'm putting a beat. This represents the burpi here on top of the words. So you got ngara talkari ngate karpela nga maratalpa doni akulai. You can hear the burpi, the beat of it. And he would have used boomerangs because that Ernie King, John King's brother, says at the end, "Wana balka," which means where's the boomerangs? I need the boomerangs to play the song. And then the next part is the wakaima. That's means to make the dance. And in our article, they said the legs were open, the knees bent. As the dancers moved their arms from side to side, they slightly bent their knees. The dancers moved forward towards the audience, swaying their arms from side to side. And here's an old fella, Tom Clark, the son-in-law of Fred Biggs, showing how they dance, doing that wide shaker leg. That's our style. That has been kept too. We've got all our old dance styles, luckily, that's been passed on. And I'm sure, that he's sitting there banging away and singing the rhythms and making people want to dance. You can feel it in you. So then I put the rhythm in. That makes you want to dance. I won't use pitch yet as I'm showing you the steps. Ngara taukari ngate kapela nga marata ba dunia kala duru kagari mang ina lambala nga ujungge dunia nga ngara taukari ngate kapela. So that's the dancing rhythm. And next is the palimatakon, the sky and the ground, the direction, the pitch. An old fellow named Fred Reese, or Uwalore man. Uwalore is another neighbouring language. He was talking about this series of funeral songs. And he was singing them all, these different songs. And then in the recorder, Janet Matthews, "Oh, that one sounds the same." And he said, "They all sound the same, like. They all got to sound the same. They got the same air right through." So a lot of these songs have reoccurring melodies or pitch, whatever you want to call it. But he says the same air that moves up and down, the same energy. So I call it the palimatakon. So now I put the palimatakon in the direction of how you want to sing it. And they're not, once again, I'll reiterate, they're not steps in a scatic form. They just move up and down how you feel it. That's that first line there. So what I did is I just kind of, for now anyway, I might change this later. I've made a little compromise and put a staff there, musical staff there, but it's only 3 lines. It doesn't represent any Western musical notes. It's just to show you how the melody goes up and down. So you got so you can hear it go up and down. This is now the mar, the body of the song, and what sections you want to go to. Now, it's never strict. You don't, in Western music, you'd say A section, B section, or A, B, or A, B, C, or, verse, chorus, bridge, verse, chorus, whatever it might be. But in our music, we're more sort of free than that. we might sing the same section over and over and over until the dancers get it to that special place where they're all connected as one. So the singer decides when they want to change the section. And I've heard this, do I quote that? No. I've heard this in other songs, like the Bunjalung songs from old Dick Donnelly. Dancers change step now, and then he sings a new section. And he even said, when he was teaching his songs to Waifellas, he said, I go to that Mundala section now. Now I'll go to that other section. He'd actually quote words from the song. He wouldn't say A section and B section. So that's what I've done. I was talking about the Ngati Kapala section. Do that 3 times. And then do the Ngana Yana Yai section 4 times. And then do, what have I got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And then do the Ngati Kapala section 2 more times. And that's the way I hear people today talk about the songs as well. Go to that next section now. You've got to do that different shake leg now. And as the singers sing, the dancers are listening to the singers, and they'll know when to change step. So a modern adaptation of that now is people put cuts in songs. They'll stop and do stuff like that to people go, oh, they're going to change the section of the song. But in these older songs, they don't do that. They just start singing a new section, and you've got to listen and you've got to follow along. Next is the nganta. That's the breath of the song. Old Jimmy Barker was from, I don't know if he's from there, but he lived a lot at Brewarrina, lived there. And he was a Murrawari man, another neighbouring language, and knew a lot of Ngiampa culture and language and things. When singing songs, the Murrawari held their breath for as long as possible. This resulted in great breathlessness, as for the older singers. And then when Tamsin Donald was talking about Fred Biggs's performance of a song about a lost boy, she was looking at multiple different performances. And she said Fred Biggs's one was different. The reason she said it was different. And he was a recognised songman too. There is a far larger pitch range of his performance than anyone else's. It is sung faster and breaths are snatched more rapidly. So what she means by that is, you know, he's singing along and then he'll sing along and then he'll go as long as he can in that breath. So there's this thing about the breath that's really important. It's like the life of the song, the energy of the song, giving to the song. Excuse me. So that's an old style, which is opposite to Western music singing technique. In Western music singing technique, you're meant to always have a full breath. You're meant to always fill your diaphragm up and never let it go to the end where you're struggling because it's bad for your vocal cords because you need a perfect voice and perfect tone. But once again, that doesn't matter. So all these little intricacies in our singing is our identity and the way we do it. And putting it into Western, once again, reiterating, putting into Western musical notations, colonising the song and changing them. And I'm not scared of change either. I'm just saying I think we've lost a lot of our original style. Change is good. New stories are good. New ways are good. As long as we don't forget the old ways of who we are. Next up is the Yui. Yui is your name. But it's a funny way to say it. Yui is, you can't say your name. It's just who you are. Your name, you can't own a name. Name is Yui is me, name, Jesse. But the names of them ancestors are really important. So think of it like that's an ancestor. It's not just the animal. And people get named after these. In the old days, we either get named after ancestors or named after things in our songline. Usually from your father's country, where you inherit your father's. You inherit your father's country in songline, but you inherit your mother's blood and social rights and things, which is pretty common across a lot of different groups from what I've seen. So the Yui is the name of the ancestor that you're singing about. And when you're singing about that and telling that story and the dancers are dancing that ancestor, you're bringing it back to life and you're being that ancestor again and you're joining that chain that I was talking about before. So you've got to represent that ancestor when you're singing the song. And that's why I showed earlier on, I'll just go back to that mountain, Umbi that travelled. So we've got the place there, the country, Thigabilla, that was travelling. You've got the song for it, you've got the tracks. We're singing about that. And although the song might not definitely be about that exact story, of course it relates to it when we're singing about it, because we know what the Thigabilla relates to. We know where it travelled. We know what it did wrong and what law it broke and what law we've learned from the Thigabilla. So when we're singing about that, we're connecting with all them things, that depth of knowledge. So we've got to sing for that ancestor and for that name. Maybe even sound like it, you know. I've heard crow songs where they're wow, 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 while they're singing. So once again, I'll just remind you, I'll play that song again.
This is another song they made.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, about this porcupine.
Yeah.
Put all together now. So for us now, that's what's important to me, is our ancestral connection. So I've made songs today with them old styles and thinking about them proper ways of singing, about our stories that we've held within us, about our emu ancestors and emu ancestors traveling. So this is a song that we've made. I'll sing it for you now. So it's about the nguroi, which is the emu, the father emu, and the chicks following the father, which is actually what happens. Learning about its murampa, its mura, learning its mura. Nguroi wanga babago mamana, nguroi wanga babago mamana, jibawana murampa lokanga. Nguroi wanga babago mamana, nguroi wanga babago mamana, nguroi wanga babago mamana, jibawana murampa lokanga. Nguroi wanga babago mamana, nguroi wanga babago mamana, jibawana murampa lokanga. Nguroi wanga babago mamana, nguroi wanga babago mamana, nguroi wanga babago mamana, jibawana murampa lokanga. Now, I'll finish up now with the dance for that. We just recently did it at that dance rights, what's that called, at a festival? Not a festival, dance rights competition. I'll just play it for you now. Yeah, here it is. That's the women. Right, first. Mamona, So that's it. You get to see the dance for it. You get to see the paint up for it, like Amy paint up, and the singing and how they all connect together. And for me, that's what's important. All right. Well, thanks for listening. And that's me, Yana Katono.
Jesse, you still there, mate? Nah, just kidding. So now that that's over, I think that's a really important presentation to show how connectedness language is to everything. It's not just language, it's our culture, medicine, health, art, dance. And I think Jesse explains that and shows that really well, not with that presentation, but also his research. So now I'd like to bring up Rodney Adams to give his presentation on Auslan, is it? Indigenous Sign Language, sorry. So, thanks, Rodney.
Thank you, everyone. I'm not normally used to having one of these. I normally have an interpreter, but today, unfortunately, couldn't find anyone to support me. They all deserted me, so it's just that busy time of the year, and booking interpreters was pretty hard to come by. So I'm doing all this verbally. So I feel a little bit shackled, because when I do presentations like this, I prefer to sign away, and I just go boom, you know. So speaking through one medium through verbal languages, it's a little bit of a nervous train wreck for me. So please bear with me while I go through it. Okay, thank you. So I'm Rodney, so I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we have at this conference and pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and the homelands of everyone here. So, where am I? I want to start off with a story because I think it's very important that we have a visual aspect of why sign languages are so important. So, it's a story that involves my partner. She went to Germany with a group of friends. It was just after the Deaf Olympic Games in 1981. And there's a group of deaf people, hearing people, they all went to a cafe in Germany, and someone wanted to order a cup of tea. So the waitress came out, and because all the Aussies speak only English and the Germans spoke only German, there was a little bit of a communication breakdown. So all they wanted was a little bit of milk in the cup of tea, but because of the communication barriers, it wasn't clear what was really wanted. So they're trying to verbalise how they're going to explain, I just want a little bit of milk in my tea, and the waitress was a bit perplexed, a bit confused because they couldn't speak the same languages. My partner over here notices the waitress was, I'll stand back. So the next thing my partner does so the waitress just burst out with a lovely big smile, walked back into the kitchen and came out with a huge jug of milk. So that just goes to show that how we can overcome the restrictions of verbal languages. Okay, so we all know in Indigenous communities back in the past, maybe not so much now, non-verbal communication was very, very big, very much an integrated part of our cultures and our community and our customs, our values and our languages. So it's really important to take note of that as I go through this paper. So So just hearing speaking is a domain of Western civilizations. But for Indigenous communities in Australia and North America, I'll give you examples from both, these characteristics had equal value with visual and non-verbal forms of communication. So, is this not working? Oh, okay. So one very good example is a man by the name of Banggi. He apparently was the first person to navigate or to make his way around Australia by boat. The white fella, does anyone recall his name? Maybe it's not so important, maybe we just focus on Banggi, okay, because he was basically at the front of the boat, a bit like the Titanic, and he was navigating and helping this man and his cat navigate around Australia. Okay, so we'll just leave it at that. So it's more important to focus on our Indigenous heroes and how important they were to, current settlement that we have today in Australia. So we can imagine as he sails around the coastline that he will have to not only navigate the terrain of the country but navigate the many different languages in Australia. How would he be able to communicate every time they ran out of food, they needed repairs on their boat, they would have to go on shore and meet with different mobs and communicate with all those different, language groups that we know are so diverse in Australia. So maybe he knew a bit of verbal, but most likely he would have used a lot of non-verbal communication. So his translanguaging skills, which is the ability to use other communication mediums apart from verbal, would have been probably quite extraordinary. So he probably would have used a bit of signing, a bit of gestures, a bit of writing in the dirt. Whatever was available for him, he would have been able to use it to communicate, to ensure that navigation journey made its full way all the way around Australia. So when you think about that, that's quite a remarkable achievement that he was able to communicate with all our different mobs around the coastline. So we need to remember that, particularly when we just focus on white history and what they've achieved. But as we know, English is have very strong monolingual characteristics that doesn't really accept other languages so much. So it's important that we remember that. Also, in the north, you can see in the map there, that's a colonial version of all the sign languages in Australia. So a guy by the name of Adam Kendon, who's written a lot about Aboriginal sign languages, he was able to go back through the archive and through history and document every documentation of explorers and early linguists, I suppose, if you want to call them that, and showed where these explorers encountered sign languages or gestures all across the continent. So you can see Australia as a continent, lots of different sign languages. Some were strong, some were not so strong, but really the continent was full of a variety of different sign languages and gestures that were a really important part of our history. So in the northeastern area alone, some 18,890 signs were recorded by linguists. That is quite a remarkable amount of signs that were recorded. Half of those are single lexical items and the other half are sentence-length text. So as we know in the top end, very strong use of sign languages, and the not only just used by the tribe, but when they had corroboree gatherings and other purposes like during periods of mourning, sign language was quite prevalent during those times, and we can see why they're so important. This guy here is quite a remarkable man, Chief Red Horse from the North American continent. Some of you might know the Battle of Little Bighorn. The Indians defeated the might of the US Army, one of the very few defeats that the United States Army got beaten by. So quite an achievement in itself. But I like to think of it more as like the Indian, because I'll talk about it in a minute. They used a lot of plain Indian sign languages. So we have the battle of the signers against the non-signers. So the signers won, because often when people sign, we're often oppressed by people who don't really understand its agenda. So a couple of years later, a guy from the coast, from the East Coast, wanted to write about what happened in the battle, and they interviewed this guy called Chief Red Horse, and he was able to give him a story about what actually happened over the 2-day event. But remarkably, he did it all in plain Indian Sign Language. So why he did that, I don't know, but I think it's an example of how prevalent sign languages were on the plains of the United States or Canada and Mexico. So the examples of 600 signs that he used. He also used pictographs, like he did drawings on the ground to explain the 2-day battle. So it's quite remarkable in 1882, I believe it was, that he did it all in sign language. But he wasn't deaf, he was hearing. So again, that just shows how remarkable and prevalent sign languages were back then. Okay, so that's a map of where the plain Indian Sign Language occurs. So you can see it's right up into Canada, all down to the back of the Rocky Mountains, all the way out to the Mississippi River, and even down into Mexico. And on those plains were 40 plus different tribes, all spoke their different languages in order to communicate with each other, to trade. They had all relied on plain Indian Sign Languages. So it's quite remarkable in this day and age. We often talk about how, what do we call it, phonocentrism, which means the dominance of verbal languages over non-verbal languages. And when we compare it to those times, we see how very much the opposite that was, and how cool it was to actually use sign languages to communicate, to trade, to talk about family lineage, talk about stories, and lots of different things like that. Okay, and even there's evidence of PISL, which is Plain Indian Sign Language, on rock art dating back 1500 years ago. So when we talk about colonial sign languages that came out from Europe, I think they're more a result of the impacts of the revolution, you know, masses of people coming together, and you have deaf people amongst those, and only then, in the 1700s, sign language was starting to develop as like a standardised languages, whereas before that, everyone was scattered. But if we compare that to indigenous nations, it was already there. So we used it for other purposes. And both hearing and deaf people alike used it for many different reasons. Okay, so pretty self-explanatory. You know, Western societies don't really cultivate or actually oppress sign languages, not only languages like Auslan, but indigenous sign languages that was very much a part of our continent back in the day. And when we think about that, we think, well, indigenous cultures really accepted deaf and hard of hearing people as one, because sign language flourished. There's no communication barriers. It's very easy to get by if you're a deaf person. And I think I remember one example of a woman in one of the central deserts of Australia. You know, they had these mourning periods where women only had to sign. Men were able to talk when someone passed away. But this woman, for some reason, loved signing, and she just kept on signing for the next 25 years without talking. So it's a little bit like Chief Red Horse, you know, he was able to be comfortable with his sign languages and express them to, you know, their full potential and the potential of the brain as well. An example of the contradiction between Western civilization and Indigenous community, a recent study showed that 87% of a survey amongst a white population in America found them had to have 87% of a negative mindset towards deaf or hard of hearing people. Okay, so think about our Indigenous communities, sign language flourish, current communities. If you're deaf, you're seen as, you know, lower than the norm, you know. You had a stigma attached to you, you're often seen as unemployable, too hard to work with, lots of things that come to mind. Okay, and then when we look at the social and emotional well-being, if you're deaf, we know we encounter racism amongst our Aboriginal population, but when we have deaf on top of that, you have a double disadvantage or double disabilities. So results from the Queensland Department of Education state that for teenagers, they experience 40% of mental health issues compared to only 20% or 25% of hearing students. So that's almost double if you're deaf, likely to have mental health issues. So if you're Aboriginal and you're deaf, double disadvantage again. And that's why Mackay Cody, Indigenous from Oklahoma in the USA, terms gravity of oppression, which means where hearing professionals oppress deaf people who in turn internalise these biases, and then again oppressing Indigenous deaf people as well. So that's where that double disadvantage comes from. Okay, so we talk about the revitalisation of our spoken languages, Indigenous language and their importance. If we link it to social and emotional well-being, we know the connection there is so strong. So the more we bring back our languages, the more likely we will have a better confidence about ourselves, our place in the world, and connection to our ancestors. Lots of different things where our overall well-being will be greatly improved. And it's the same in Indigenous sign languages. There's things happening around the world where they're trying to bring it back, because not only for deaf Indigenous people, but also for hearing Indigenous people. And it's because it's who we are. You know, it's very much a natural part of our DNA to have connection to the past and knowing all about sign languages as well. So when we talk about language deprivation, I work in the field of deaf education in the deaf sector. Language deprivation is real, it's rife. Western societies focus on verbal languages, often at the expense of social and emotional well-being, and poor language skills as well. So I won't talk too much about that because it's all a little bit political, but sometimes the mass amount of funding that's given to programs that try to eliminate ear diseases, improve hearing health are good, but they don't fill in that gap that we all know about. You know, they're closing the gap that we often hear about and know it's not working. It's very much the same with deaf Indigenous children and people as well. So even a little bit of that funding will go a long way towards revitalising some of our Indigenous sign languages. So we all talk about combating settler colonialism, autism, is a suppression of people who are deaf or have hard of hearing abilities, and it comes back to that 87% that we talked about in the past, about if you're deaf, your quality of life starts to deteriorate and you're not seen as an equal person in the eyes of many. And that philosophy or that attitude is related to social Darwinism, the eugenics, Justinian Code, where that you have a pecking order. If you were deaf in Roman times, if you were deaf or mute or couldn't speak, you had very little rights to property, to have a house, a good quality of life, all that sort of thing. So that sort of transferred into colonial systems here in Australia as well. So okay, you might ask, in technology we trust. Maybe I borrowed the line from America, a little bit of focus on America at the moment, but technology is not the be and all. It's good, but it's not the solution to many of our deaf and hard of hearing people. So cochlear implants and hearing aids, like myself, they do help, but they don't actually, they're not the solution to everything. There's still barriers that we have to overcome. And the other thing that's really important is, languages. It's not just spoken. It can be non-verbal, as we're talking about in this conference. It can be a medium of many different ways of how we communicate and get our message across and communicate. So it's not limited to speech, because the brain can see patterns in the same way it sees patterns in spoken languages. The phonetics, it hears the repetition of the sound, but then the brain can also look at sign language and see the repetition of hand shapes, the orientation of the hand, the movement of the hand, the location. These are all the phonology of sign languages that also have a pattern. So if the brain can see that, then sign language is just as much a legitimate language as any spoken languages as well. And also, we often see deafness as the issue. Some of our Indigenous communities have some of the highest rates of hearing loss compared to mainstream society, and you wonder why, but then you can see, well, maybe that's why they had so much sign language use back in the day, to overcome those things. And really, just being deaf is not the issue. It's about how do we make that person become inclusive in our society by looking at different ways of communicating rather than just relying and restricting and a focus on spoken languages only. Okay. What have I got there? Is that blank? There it is. Okay, so that language deprivation, it's really due to a lack of access. So here's some questions that I might think you would be interested to learn. So according to the Article 13 of the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous people have the right to revitalise, use, develop, transmit to future generations their history, languages, oral traditions, philosophies, writing systems and literature, and to designate and retain their own names for communities, places and persons. And when we think about languages, that sign language is included. So it's very important to take note of that, not to just think of languages as spoken only, but also in sign. So thank you very much for your time and enjoy your day.
I work in health. I work in Aboriginal maternal health for Hunter New England Health. One of my clients is profoundly deaf, and her husband, and we found and we still find it sometimes difficult to book Auslan interpreters because they're so busy within our health system just here in Newcastle. So I just wanted to mention that, and the difficulty she finds it through our community here in Newcastle of navigating the system and some services. So I just want to share that with you. And yeah, beautiful family.
Yeah, that's very true. The supply and demand for interpreters is enormous. There's just not enough interpreters to meet that demand. I think it's because interpreters actually have a low status in our communities, and governments are not really trying to improve that. And I guess that's why they're funding so much of the hearing or the photocentric program. You know, let's pour more money into cochlear devices and hearing aids. They're good to some extent, but we know that that's like the deficit model, and they don't solve everything. So we need to have, you know, other plans, other strategies to make sure that happens. And one of the other things I've really noticed too is, you know, we would love to have more Aboriginal interpreters. I mean, it's in our DNA, but something's gone missing, you know, so it would be really good to have that back, because I'm pretty sure back in the day, if I had to go to a meeting, someone would pop up and interpret away, and it wouldn't be any thought about it, because it was just so prevalent of sign languages back in those days. But now, you know, everything's changed. So thank you for your question.
Do you have any idea, because my husband's deaf, cochlear, we were assuming that it's come through the white genetics. What information is that perhaps Indigenous or Koori people had a genetic line for deafness or a gradual deterioration in hearing, which you wouldn't attribute to noise? Have you any information on that?
I don't have any scientific information about that. I just know that, as I said before, Indigenous communities often have high rates of hearing loss, whether it's because of ear diseases or otis media, I'm not really sure. So I do know of families in Aboriginal communities have 3 or 4 generations of deafness in the family, also here in North America. But that's very prevalent in mainstream white societies as well, to have that DNA. Yeah, I can't really answer that question. I don't really have enough knowledge on that aspect of it, but it is quite prevalent in both communities to have that.
Now, we've had some conversations in the past, but you were talking about the development or expansion of an Indigenous First Peoples sign initiative program development. Can you talk a bit about that, your visions for that?
Yeah, I think it's very, very early days at the moment. I think a lot of the revitalisation efforts are geared towards spoken languages, so it probably wasn't until last year that I presented the same paper at various conferences that people in government departments that were, you know, actively supporting Indigenous languages thought, why have we never thought about this before? So, so there are work, like for example, Yolngu Sign Language. They just recently published a beautiful hardback cover book that's, you know, will be treasured in my bookshelf for many years to come. So, and there's other programs like that happening in some parts of WA, Northern Territory and Queensland about revitalising native sign languages. But I think that funding, or that lack of funding, is really something we need to focus on to get more money into that. So, because it now benefits both hearing and deaf people, you know, it's a link to our ancestors, and that's a very powerful thing.
Ronnie, I would just like to say thank you for showing us the connection between our spoken language but also sign language. And to me, I think it's really important that potentially in the future that we could show sign and also spoken language learnt together, because they do go hand in hand, which, like we've seen in previous presentations from Jesse and Kua, that it's not only language, it's sign language, dance, paintings, and whatever else. So yeah, thank you. So now that we have a little bit of a break for lunch, could we just get everyone outside just to kind of maintain social distancing since COVID's a thing, and we should be back around 12:20. 12:20 for our next presentation. So thank you. So hopefully everyone enjoyed lunch and had a bit to process the presentations that we've had so far, whether that being online or here in person. So just before we pass on to the next presenter, I'd just like to make it clear that you are able to post questions, whether that being online to the live stream or here in person today. So I'll head behind and even walk upstairs throughout this next session. And if anyone has questions, just feel free to put up your hand and I'll come by and put it down on my piece of paper for the Q&A that we'll have after. So the next presentation we'll have is by Dr. Ray Kelly, or Uncle Ray, on the Muuya Banggi program. So thank you.
Thank you. Kinagay Ngujawan, Yama, what else do we have? Yawai, and a myriad of any other ways that you're able to say hello in communicating. Hello, word for hello. Or black or white. My piece here is to talk a little bit about my language journey to some degree, but also to talk a little bit about this program of Muuya Banggi. Let me first say, begin by acknowledging country and respecting the elders, in particular elders in the room, and community members. A little note just pointed out to me, which I'm happy to embrace, and that is that we've identified Mrs. Sharon Edgar Jones on our outlet. Pointed out that she is rightfully a respected elder of the Wanneroo people. So take that apology as sincere and honest, and we'll take care of that in the future. All right. Look, let me say that getting this this conversation together has been a difficult one. Not to produce it today, but to conceptualise the idea of bringing people together to have a conversation about language. Because language comes with the connotation of culture, it also comes with the connotation of land, dispossession, and a broad range of other issues. But the idea that language is freedom, for me, has long been a safe haven. And I'm going to show you today where I work within the languages, and to some degree it is quite safe because it's a place where I can operate entirely by myself, which can be very isolating, and it's a good learning tool, but it's also a very lonely place at times. So let me just start here. Is that right? Okay. Have I gone too far? I think I've gone too far. Can somebody bounce that back for us? Okay, that was the first one. Next one. So what do we mean when we talk about a community language? Now, my screen's out of my sight, but the term now is recognised worldwide. Community language. All groups in the world now talk about community languages other than English. Why? Because why is it every other language is a community-based language and English is English? Well, I think it's about that notion of domination in the world. And so, established in, was it 1975? Is that what's on the screen? 1975, here in Australia, conceptualised idea came about. And so today we have, and we are experiencing community language development, community language growth, community reawakening everywhere. But it came from there. Now I'm going to take my next little slide, and that's that partly what Rodney was talking a little bit earlier about the issue of why languages are important. Sorry, I'm going to have to go around the front. I can't see my screen. Can I take this? Okay. So the United Nations Declaration for Indigenous People, Rights of Indigenous People. It's that Article 13. It says that Indigenous people have the right to revitalise, use, develop, transmit to future generations their histories, languages, oral histories, philosophies, writing systems, and literatures to designate and retain their own names for community places and persons. A very important statement, but it's really about the enactment. How do we hold that to be true, and how do we make sure that that happens? It also points out, point 2 says, states shall take effective measures to ensure that this right is protected and to ensure that Indigenous peoples can understand and be understood in political, legal and administrative proceedings where necessary through the provisions of interpretation or by other appropriate means. So when we're talking about language, are we really talking about communicating about the issues, or are we really just saying, oh, I'm hearing what you're saying? And I think that that's where, for me, that's where that issue really is. We've been talking about rights, the fight for equal rights. I think we need to really change the language around this, and it's something that I've been quite comfortable doing. And I think we really need to be starting to talking about the notion of sovereign rights. Sovereignty, what does that really mean? Because I think it's in the language. When we talk about country, we talk about place. We can talk about people, but people in place. I'm going to move through real quick. For me, this is where we are today is a continuation of a process that I began in 2006 when I first came to the university here with an honorary doctorate. And it became a part of my thesis, which is entitled Dreaming the Kipara. The way in which I frame this is the idea that we do have an ear in both camps. And what I mean by an ear in both camps is that there are elements of language description, language identification that continue to live with us in our everyday lives, and yet sometimes we don't see them as being a pure form of language. More often than not, we've attributed them to either being slang or swearing. But in fact, for me, they do have a central point that connects us to country, that connects us to this place, that connects us here prior to the arrival of the colonial movement. So I've framed this idea around working in, having an ear in both camps, that there are 3 points to this that we can work into this material. There is language material, which we're always pulling together, we're always drawing material together, grabbing new analogies, finding new connections. But there's always that issue of listening to old people. Now, as every year passes, we lose more and more of those senior people, not just with knowledge about language, but knowledge about time and events. And so we don't see we do see, but I don't think we give enough credibility or enough honour to the fact that people can carry stories well beyond their time, and in fact will pass those stories on to the next generation. So for me, it's that idea of working together to find some sense of what those stories are, and the fact that you can actually still listen to old people on recorded files. Excuse me. Now, storytelling has long been a part of transmitting stories all throughout this country. And the fact that 2 groups of people may see a particular place in 2 ways shouldn't detract from the fact that 2 stories are kept. What tends to happen sometimes is people start to get into a bit of argy-bargy about who has the correct story. And I think that that's potentially a difficult time. But if we can find a way in which 2 stories might uphold both truths, then you've got more and more material. I think the traditional education system is still very much in place. We have uncles and aunties, so older uncles will work with younger guys, older aunties will work with younger girls, and so I think that that's still in place. But for me, the key is around multilingualism. We have a myriad of words that live in our communities, and we go, oh well, where did that word come from? It's like the idea of the word Dubai, which is Banjalang for a sweetheart, but it's in many places it's been reduced to Dub. We got Galang, which is a girlfriend or a boyfriend, and yet some people only want it to be female-based. So these sorts of, recognising and starting to experience this multilingualism is an important thing. And I'm going to, sorry Rod, I'm going to have to pick you up on the fact that today we're actually starting to learn about another element of that multilingualism, and that is about sign language. And I think it's a very important thing as we move through this journey that we start to understand that we do talk in sign language. I think it's the character in 10 Canoes, Richie Mururu, I think his name might be, and he has that stranger who comes to the community and he sees him and he goes, and the guy walks to him and he goes, and so in the space of, a fifth of a second or whatever it is, we've just seen somebody invite somebody to come and express himself. And so I think that's an important thing. Multilingualism, there's a myriad of ways in which we can do this language work into the future. Now the other issue is about this academic knowledges, and so for many of us who are working in this space, this becomes a very difficult thing. Particularly when all of the material is very uneven. Some people write it like this, some people write it like that. Some people describe it in this way. And so I'm wondering, is this a reason why we don't engage as much with language because it's written in that way? I don't know. But those historical sources are there. Those audio recordings are there. But for me, it's about linguistic reanalysis. We're always working out what are the depths to this language material, what are its important pieces. And so in that diagram, the cultural meaning being the core of all that is the essence of this idea for revaluing, revitalising and renewal. Well, today we're all very comfortable, much more comfortable with the idea of reawakening, because it means that something has never left us. It's just been awake. And if we wake it up and it starts to talk to us, and people say, how can language talk to you? Well, actually, this is the way I describe it. It goes in my head and it's still in there and it keeps going around until I mouth it. This is what happens to me. I work with language sound files. I have the thing in my head and to the point that I then start to mouth it. So I'll start walking around the backyard and my wife will sing out, "You're talking to yourself again." I do it. I just wanted to put this image up because, and I apologise for not warning in advance, there is somebody that's deceased in this image, but he's been a long-time friend and countryman who indicated to me something quite distinct about language, particularly what we're calling Dangati language as opposed to Gumbangi language. He says, "You Dangati people have this E on the end of everything. E." And so I wondered what that phenomena was, this E. And it sort of steered me in a direction, particularly when I'm listening to sound files. This thing is not working. Okay. So in 1966, this paper was produced by a gentleman named Nils Holmer. And I'm going to borrow here quickly from a very important paper by William B. McGregor and Misty Amo, I think is by the sound of it. And he talks about Nils Holmer, who is a linguist Nordic, from a Nordic country to have first-hand experiences in language work. And he came to work on two languages on the north coast, but he travelled up the east coast of Australia. And in 6 weeks, in the period of 6 weeks, he'd produced this a range of sound files, recordings, and these descriptions between these two languages. This is what they're calling Gatang and Dangati. And so they sit beside each other in terms of sound recordings, and there are a myriad of, there's a multiple layer of linguistic analysis inside of that material. Now, I'm not going to have any time at all here today to try and dig deeper into that linguistic space. But what it does is it starts to set up sometimes barriers. Now, perceived barriers? Okay, so Dangati and Gatang, two distinct languages. Are they distinct? Okay. So it really makes you start to think about how languages really exist. If we live in close proximity to each other historically, how do they communicate? And so that becomes my pathway in the language space. Another one? Have a quick look at Nils Holmer. Okay, so this is Nils Holmer. These recordings were made in 1964. So the language space we're talking about is here. And obviously he did a lot of other things while he was there. But when we start looking to his the people that he communicated with, all of these people, quite a number of them are known to us, and particularly to older community members. They're very much known to us. But for somebody to have done this analysis in 6 weeks, I'm in awe of the work, actually. I have some challenges in terms of what the sound files say, but in terms of what he did in 6 weeks, quite remarkable. And to that end, you then look at ongoing material from there, and you look at people who say, I wonder if he did this, or should he have done that? But that's work for us today. But these sound files are so rich, there's a depth inside of that, but they also talk about stories of country and place. Here he is talking to Mr. Eddie Lobban, probably at Purfleet, in 1964. Very interesting character, this old man, because I've been listening to him for quite a while now. And one of the things that you try to make sense of in terms of the language is how does he mouth those words? Okay, and that's what I'm currently involved in. So this is an analysis of that, one of those tapes. And I've put it here because my great-grandfather, Frank Archibald, in 1968, recounts a song about a little girl, or a boy, I'm not sure, because he said a little girl, he didn't say a boy or girl, that was killed. Now this was recorded in Armidale. So is there a relationship? Can there be some connection? Well, that's the analysis that's coming to the fore at the moment. So what we're trying to do with our language work is we're trying to work on core basis particles. And so when we look at the description here, I'm trying to say that you can find them in the languages, but you have to do the work. And so when we're talking with our students, or as Kua correctly pointed out, language teachers, we have to have a conversation about practical things, real things. So if I don't know, I have to say I don't know. But if you, and Sharon, I think we were just saying, if you can bring me something that I don't know, great, we'll both learn together. And that's what we have to have in our communities. It can't be division without understanding what division means. What separates us, what unites us. Two-way. So here we are in 1975. In 1975, a group of young men working with the National Parks and Wildlife Service, going out onto country, talking with both Dangati and Banggi speakers and community, and we're picking up some language, we're picking up historical stories, but I got to tell you, at that age, I was of the belief that our languages were either on the way out, of no value. So something happened in the school system, I believe, that created that isolation. And so, Rod, when you're talking about not being able to advance in schools because of isolation, what creates isolation? Are people really listening? I'm talking about the students. Or is there a failure to make connection? I don't know, but maybe as we keep working through this, we'll come to some understanding. I can tell you today that when we're talking about some of these sites, that some of my community have a really different take on the way in which those old men spoke to us. They did tell us that it was a sort of men's businessy thing, old men taken out and trying to straighten up young boys. I understand that. But they told us about resistance, particularly in the site at Ebor, that people had gathered there in 1880, and they came from everywhere. 600 men came from all directions. Hunter Valley was identified. Kamilaroi was identified. Clarence River was identified. So people came there in 1880 for this conversation amongst, I would believe, men because of the notion of resistance. But as a child I went, how would they know? What I had done inadvertently is I'd believed that language and story and history had passed, that these men, you know, they wouldn't have been born in the 1880s, they wouldn't have been born. So something had happened in my mind, my worldview as a child, that didn't allow me to really honour what these old people were saying. Now, we can find evidence to know that our people, and we're experiencing this evidence more and more because people are involved in research, that resistance has been continued since day one, and it has never left us. We are still on our own country. We are still able to express and explore our cultural worldview. We just got to find ground, common ground, to come together to have conversations that benefit our community. I mentioned that Jesse and I had come up with a little song earlier, and I'm going to finish on this because you don't want to hear me rabbit on for too long, but here's Jesse and I with this idea about the word iri uri ari. And I'll let the song talk and then I'll let the song speak for itself. All right. We're here recording iri uri ari, particle-based language learning. Jesse's the composer, and we think these are very important for language rebuilding, language recovery, and as you mentioned, it's about a hook.
Yeah.
Something catchy.
It's hook you in, so you're learning the language.
But not this hook.
No.
Other hook.
Yeah. The corroboree song, eh?
Contemporary corroboree song.
Corroboree song.
From them little ones.
Yeah.
For the little ones. Let's go.
All right.
Iri uri ari, iri uri ari, this do it that, this do it that. Iri uri ari, iri uri ari, this do it that, this do it that. Iri uri uri ari ari, this thing doing this that thing. Iri uri uri ari ari, this thing doing this that thing. Iri uri ari, iri uri ari, this do it that, this do it that. Iri uri ari, iri uri ari, this do it that, this do it that. Yours. Ngay giwi iringin.
Ngay irting too.
Ninda ngani gani, you the same way.
Yeah?
Same way, ngani gani, same way. Feeling the same way.
Ngani gani, yeah. Giwi irting.
That's it. Okay. So I just want to leave you with one thing, and this is about our class. All right. We started off, as Kua mentioned, we were working in here. We had ideas, we had material, but we've built the language course together because we're responding to what people have been asking us. And Kua, I want to honour you today by saying this language today, but the language course couldn't be what it was without your drive and determination, and I applaud you for that. I want to thank all the other people who were here today. Raquel, for making this work. Look forward to doing this more. But I wanted to, sorry, Wanda, I wanted to point out that one of our students, we sent out a questionnaire with room underneath for an answer. Sorry, a question with room underneath for an answer. It went something like, wa baba arn milai irn daru milai irn guma, question mark. So they've got their material that they can work from. All the particles are there. So we come up, and sorry you guys, I've got to put you in. I know that you're all saying that you weren't there that day. Most of the guys went straight for the idea of Baba, that axe, stone, and they couldn't get past stone axe. Their mind at that stage couldn't get past stone axe. Now, of course, we put it on them, and they weren't sure about what we were doing. They'll know next time. And I said, no, that's not right. And Wanda actually said, is it the stone that sharpens the axe? I've got to tell you, I was so elated, I just couldn't, I punched the air, didn't I? Because it isn't about, it's about can we convey more than just simple messages? Or, you know, more, is there a depth in the language? And it was just brilliant. It was, I just wanted to thank you for that, Wanda. All right, I'm going to move on because you don't want to be here listening to me. You want... Yeah.
Thanks, Uncle Ray. So I think I get a lot of out of Uncle Ray's class is because it is back to that linguistical side of things, and that's just how my brain works, unfortunately. But yeah, so I like to thank Uncle Ray and Kua for developing our classes to what they are today, because it gives me the ability to do what I do and what I did this morning. So going on to our next presentation, I'd like to invite Auntie Sharon Agda-Jones to the stage to talk about the Wonnarua language class. And just before you begin as well, I am floating around the back if you do have any questions, so just put up your hand. Thanks, Auntie.
Yes. I thought he said he was flirting out the back there, and I'm thinking, oh! Yeah, ala wiabu anakanya, yeah, nata natiwa Sharon. Yeah, I'm a Wonnarua and Gringai woman, connected to the Hunter Valley, also the Allen River region, and I've been working for the last 10 years towards the revival or reclamation of the Wonnarua language. You're going to have to excuse me because I'm not real flash with the technology. I have to actually see what I'm pointing at here. So, we're reclaiming language, and for those people that don't know, reclaiming a language is not the same as reviving a language. It's part of language revival, but it's when you're reclaiming a language, you're working with a language, or you're reawakening a language that has no living speakers, and it's being retrieved from historical documents only. We have no audio recordings. The most well-known collector of the language was a fellow called Lancelot Threlkeld. And in 1857 or thereabouts, he recorded the language along with its speakers were extinct. He was referring to a group of people that lived in a region around Lake Macquarie. The language area was a lot more extensive than the coastal dialect there. It actually extended right out to Denman, Merriwa, right out west there. So, for the last 10 years I've been working towards the revival, reclamation and revival of the Wonnarua language. And this is going to sound like the Sharon show. But basically it has been me. Sorry. I'm used to having a laptop in front of me with my notes on my master slide thingo, so it's this is going to be a bit awkward for me, sorry. Okay, so, So this is a photo of my granddad at the mission school out at St Clair. My granddad's in the top right there. Oh, yep, or top left from you there. Hang on, I'll show you. That's my granddad. I'll tell you who the people are in this picture, okay? So that's Granddad, Tommy Miller. This fellow here is Fred Davis, and then Millie Waters is my granddad's first cousin. This is my granddad's sister, Liza. This young fella is Mick Waters, who's brother to Millie, and also cousin to my granddad. Young fella at the end there, I think he's a Samuels. Yep, Ernie Samuels. And then we've got a Smith, Wally Smith, and here we got, Eric Walsh, another Samuels, Freddie Samuels. The teacher is Dodie Mead. Tim Lester, who was also, he was actually my granddad's nephew. Here we have Rhoda Walsh and Edie Waters, who is also my granddad's cousin. That my family, my granddad there. This photo was taken circa 1912, and all of these people were learning English as their first language on the mission. It was prohibited to speak language or to practice anything that smacked of cultural practices. Okay. So my language journey actually commenced in 2009 when I was caring for my terminally ill mum at her home in Grafton. She had me go into the cupboard one day and, well, she had me cleaning the cupboard out. I think she was trying to make the task easier for once she'd gone. And she told me to go into the cupboard in the bedroom, clean that one out, and in the back of the cupboard I found this book. There's a salvage grammar and word list of the Hunter River Lake Macquarie region by Amanda Liserow. And I said, Mum, what's this book doing in your cupboard? What's the book doing in your cupboard? And she told me a story that about 2 years prior to that, my nephew, where is the good-looking young man? My nephew, Caden, had gone to her and had said, Moody, which is what we called our grandmothers in my family, Moody, I want a tattoo, and I want the tattoo to read blood is thicker than water, and I want it in language. Mum didn't have the language to give him, and she said it wasn't until that time that she really thought deeply about language loss, and she became a little bit wild with herself actually for being so complacent about growing up without language. She knew a couple of words, but ultimately she didn't know if they were words from her belonging place, the Hunter Valley, or if they were just words that were generic to the East Coast. And she was talking to her elders group up in Grafton about this. The elders group was made up of people from Bunjalung language region, from Gumbanga language region, Yagal, all these people who had retained some of their language, but many of them didn't have the ability to string a sentence together. And they were all talking to Mum about this, oh, Naraga, you know, we all feel for you, Floppy, because we've lost our languages as well. After the elders group had this discussion, they decided they were going to go on an excursion to Muuya Language Centre. Unfortunately, Mum was too unwell. She was going through chemo, and Mum was too unwell to go on the excursion. But when the other elders went down, they walked in to the language centre, and the first thing they saw on the shelf was this book. And they look out, there's Floppy's language. We're going to buy this book for Floppy and we're going to give her back her language. So they threw in all their money and purchased the book for Mum, cut their excursion short, and went rushing back to Grafton to present Mum with her book, with her language. They were all really excited. Mum was really excited. There were lots of tears, happiness. And after they left, Mum sat down with the book and decided to have a crack at putting that sentence together for my nephew. And she couldn't. There's a word list in the back of the book, so Mum found some of the words that were needed, but she didn't understand the meta-language that was used to describe the grammar of the language. Mum was of the generation that generally left school once they'd completed primary school and were employed elsewhere. Mum was apprenticed and sent to live in Manly, a long way away from home and from her family. So yeah, and that's not Mum's fault. So Mum, I found this book in the cupboard, so it had been there for 2 years by the time I found it. And Mum said, you put that sentence together for your Neff. And I'm like, yeah, right, okay. So I found a couple of the words that were needed, but when I turned to the front of the book to look for the grammar, for the rules that I needed to abide by to construct a meaningful sentence in language, I couldn't understand the linguistic terminology in here. There were words in here I'd never ever heard before in my life. Things like ergative, locative, assemblative, all of these words that I sort of was able to glean a little bit of an understanding just from the way they sounded, but I had no idea what was being talked about. Anyway, the book went back into the cupboard, and Mum passed away about 6 weeks after that. I took the book out of the cupboard and went looking for somebody to help me understand the book, which led me to Muuya, Aboriginal Language and Culture Cooperative at Nambucca. They were the publishers of the book. I told them that the book had to be written again because none of us could understand it. By this time I had spoken to at least 100 relatives and asked them if they'd had this book, had they heard of the book. Most of them had a copy of it sitting on their shelf or under their bed or on their coffee table, but nobody had gotten beyond the word list in the back. Nobody was able to make use of the book. I contacted Amanda. Amanda Lisrow was the author of the book, the linguist who worked on the book. She worked for 4 years on the book. And I said, you've got to do it again. You've got to do it again so we can understand it. And Amanda at that time was working on I think she may have been working on the Gurung language dictionary, or maybe the Dunghutti one. Yeah, but anyway, Amanda at that time was focused elsewhere, and she said it would be at least a decade before she revisited this language. And I'm like, yeah, right, I'm not going to wait that long. Turns out I did, but anyway, there's Caden, just in case you were wondering. There's my mum. Okay. So, Muuya, based at Nambucca, a community organisation that supports language, all the languages from the Queensland border pretty much down to Broken Bay. They put me into contact with a linguist by the name of Sophie Nichols, and I think Sophie had some input here in the Darkinjung. Oh, Darkinjung. Yeah, Darkinjung language. Sorry, we just remembered what language Amanda was working on. Let me think. Yeah, so they work all the way from they support language reclamation and revival of Broken Bay right up to Queensland border. I think it's something like 9 languages that they're supporting at this point. They put me into contact with Sophie Nichols, who was a young linguist who was working at, so I think she had some input into the dual naming that happened in Newcastle here some years ago. Anyway, Sophie was going to help me translate lessons that existed in Guttung language to Wanneroo language. By that point, I'd undertaken a Certificate 1 and 2 in Aboriginal languages, but it was in Guttung language because there was nobody to teach me Wanneroo language. Fortunately, Guttung language and Wanneroo language have about 65% rate of competency. So they're very, very well mutually understandable. Sophie and I worked together for a time, and then she got a job down Sydney Uni and left me, and I was stranded there for a while, and Jimmy Wafer, Dr. Jim Wafer, took pity on me, I think, and agreed to assist me in doing these translations for some Wanneroo language lessons. We'd met a couple of times. This is about 2014, 2015. We met a couple of times, and Jimmy looked at the lessons I was creating, and he said, "Sharon, you're not writing lessons, you're writing a learner's guide." And the idea was born to write this community accessible book myself. I wasn't going to wait the 10 years for Amanda. I was going to do it myself. It still took a long time. So Murabai linked me up with some linguists, but they also linked me up with this mob, previously known as the Resources Network for Linguistic Diversity. Dr. Margaret Flory was one of the founders, and they led me through some personal development workshops, increased my linguistic awareness, I suppose. And I actually do work for them occasionally now as a trainer, running workshops and training workshops for language workers from all over Australia, people who are working with maintaining their languages mostly. But I also, but the workshops basically are about making linguistics accessible to people who need to use linguistics, community people. Okay. So when I was working, through my involvement with Living Languages, I became a member of a language reference group who worked with them in developing a learner guide template that you can download. It can be used for pretty much any Aboriginal language that in Australia that were mainly East Coast languages we're looking at, because we're suffixes as opposed to prefixes. All of the information in the languages can be translated into the neighbouring languages, I suppose. Yeah, so it's a learner's guide template, and I'd encourage people to go and have a look at it, and go to the Living Languages website and download it, and you can actually fill in the blanks. All the grammatical explanations are there in layperson terms, and you can just fill in the blank and create a learner's guide for your own language. They've done some awesome work. So while I was doing all this learning, and I know it seems like I'm talking a lot about me, but then it was me. It was a solo journey. The whole time I was trying to encourage family members and others to join me on this journey. I travelled thousands of kilometres taking in language, learning it where I could. But only up until recently, nobody was prepared to. They kept on saying, "No, Sharon, you do it, you do it." I'm like, "Yeah, okay, I'm doing it. And then you teach us, like, "Yeah, okay, right." So the focus in the community up until recently was more about raising language awareness in the broader community, and we didn't really try and focus on teaching language at all. Basically, it was just making people aware that there was a local language. And in doing that, I would attend events like this one that I'm about to show you. I'm I'm often asked to do an acknowledgement of country or a welcome to country in language at events, and Tara, the CEO at the Minda River Land Council, asked me to go and do an acknowledgement or a welcome to country for this event that was happening out in Burcolban. And I'm like, yeah, okay, it's at a winery. Might be a bottle in it, you never know. So I got my cousins to come with me, Trace and George, and my daughter came out too. And the closer we get into the destination, the more traffic we're running into, and then we get to lollipop people directing traffic, and there's lots of signs, and I'm in a traffic jam, and I'm thinking, oh, I hope they're not all going to the same place I'm going to. And it turns out they were. So we got there a bit early, and I'm on the stage looking out at people as they're arriving, and I'm thinking, oh geez, there's easily got to be about 1,000 people there. That's huge. And then I went backstage, sat in the dressing room that they'd allocated us, and thought, geez, I'm terribly, terribly nervous. I saw the man who was running the event, and I said, geez, there's a few people out there, you know, I'm starting to get a bit nervous. And he said, yeah, this one sold out, you know, within 45 minutes. It's a capacity crowd. And I'm like, whoa, capacity crowd? What's a capacity crowd? And he said, just shy of 11,000 people. And I nearly vomited on his feet. So I took the opportunity to raise some awareness and to share some language. And this is what happened. Can you fellas play that?
Nayan.
Nayan.
Maruku.
Maruku.
Wian.
Wian.
Wanaru ampa.
Wanaru ampa.
Kuna.
Kuna.
Wirilikan.
Wirilikan.
Para.
Para.
Paraku.
Paraku.
Ani.
Ani.
Natan.
Natan.
Nayan.
Nayan.
Marum.
Marum.
Wian.
Wian.
Narakai.
Narakai.
Parampa.
Parampa.
Yurikaka.
Yurikaka.
Natan.
Natan.
Pangakal.
Pangakal.
Wanarura ampa.
Wanarura ampa.
Parai.
Parai.
Auntie.
Auntie.
Yantikai.
Yantikai.
Oh, thank you so much.
Okay. Okay, that's the end of that. Okay. So, hang on, I want to go back. Oops. Okay. No. Oh, I'm going too far back. No, there. Stop. Okay. No. Look, I told you I can't deal with technology. I think I was a Luddite in a previous life. One of those people that rebelled against the bringing of technology. Okay. So our focus had been raising awareness of language within the broader community. And I was pretty blown away. I hadn't expected people to stand for the acknowledgement like they were standing for the national anthem. And just hearing 11,000 voices repeat your language back to you, hearing hearing an echo in the hills, mind-blowing. Mind-blowing. It was pretty awesome. That's the biggest event I've ever been to. So, after that, like, apart from the 11,000 people that that were there at the time, there was a fellow from the Indigenous Life Movement group who was in the audience. It's an American organisation. He's a Native American man, and he was live streaming it, and there were 8,000 Indigenous Americans watching it at the same time, which spun me out, completely spun me out. Since it was, I think it was put on Facebook. Since it was put on Facebook, it's had just under 50,000 views. So people are really interested in language. People are really interested. So, through the 10 years that I was picking up all this knowledge and being a fringe dweller in the world of academia, I was writing this learner's guide, a beginner's guide, which is here, there. Okay, you might be familiar with the artwork. That's Loretta Fielding, Wanneroo woman, has done the artwork for us. And there's my contents page, and you can see it's pretty simple. Very simple. We had no resources. We had Amanda Lizero's book, and that was it until this came along. Now we're in a position where we can start actively teaching language. I put a lot of thought into how I wanted this book to look, and who the audience was for. Well, it was for Mum, you know. I was always writing this book for Mum. And then Albert Bergman, who was a linguist with a school teacher background, joined me around about 10 months before the book was finished, and started contributing a bit. And it was funny because I'd send it off to people and say, what are you thinking so far? And they'd say, look, it's like you're writing for two audiences, you know? You're writing for people who have absolutely no idea, and then you're writing for, in some places you're writing for people that have some idea. And I could tell those people that was Albert's stuff. Albert was writing for school teachers and prospective teachers of language, and I was writing for my community. Happily, I think we've come up with something that works. Well, I love it, and it's formed the basis of lessons now. We started language lessons for the community early last month. All right? Yeah. These are all, some of them are here in the room here with us today. But this is our first group of people. We've had pilot classes in the past, but we realised that there was still too much we didn't know. There was still too much that was foggy, not enough analysing had been done of the language, you know. So for the last 4 years, I've been working with Jimmy Wafer and Albert, well, not Albert, but Jimmy Wafer particularly in researching and analysing all the language data that relates to the Hunter River Lake Macquarie region. So we're not just looking at Threlkeld, who everybody just sort of looks at. We've got 26 primary resources, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of written data that we're analysing, and the work is ongoing, you know. I've got to say, the book's already outdated, and it was only published at the beginning of this year. There's been, because the research is ongoing, we get new information coming to us every time we meet, you know. So there's going to be a second one with more complex sentences in it, you know. But I've been supported the whole way by the community, Wanneroo Nation Aboriginal Corporation, who were the ones who provided the funding for this publication. They have copyright of it. And Wanneroo Elders Council, who have supported me through the writing of this book. They've been the reference group I've gone to. They've been the people that I looked to for constructive criticism. Generally, only got, oh, that's lovely, darling. But, I mean, it helped. I knew I was on the right track. Nobody was swearing at me or cursing me. So, yeah, Muuya, pretty proud of this one. Uncle Gary Williams, who's the elder at Murabai there. Takes it everywhere he goes, flashes it to people and says, this is the model that you need to use for all your East Coast languages. I'm like, yeah. Do it. I got copyright. So, yeah, it can be done. One person can do it, but you need to have an army supporting you. It takes a village to raise a child. It takes a community to reawaken a language. That's it. So, am I close to half an hour yet? Okay. Cheers.
Morgan, Auntie Sharon, that was really good. I think it shows the connection between, and like I've said all day, the holistic approach that we need to take with language. You really outline that and how emotional it can be when it's done well, and when people start to bring that community in. It's very emotional and kind of brings tears to your eyes, as we experienced in that video and in person, so thank you. So now I'd like to bring up Catherine Trindle, who's the Deputy Chair of the New South Wales Language Trust, to present.
Hi, Yama. Firstly, I'd like to just do a quick acknowledgement to country. And hi to Jesse, who's up there with my son.
Yes, up in the Bundy Mountains here.
So I'd like to say to you, Yama Gabayarada, Yamade, Doing Goyamba, Gombrodori, Wallabiaga, Mari, Naya Nile, Governor, Marilyn Naya, Willen Governor, Durabadale, Nyam Dan, Ningoingu, Ninyani Naldana, Ninyani No Wuldi, Ninyani Gumbilibamba, Naya Gomro Marina, Wallabiaga Nudampa, Nala Valere, Louis Dan Gunyom, Wallabiaga Timuspa, Naya Yalali Governinda, Ninyanigu Gawale Yalaru. Hello everyone, I've spoken to you in the ancestral language of my people. Those being the Gomeroi people of northwestern New South Wales. I am here working, living on country, and I come to you and I also acknowledge each and every one of you who are sharing today through the symposium. I acknowledge elders, both past and present, for their tenacity and guidance into where we are today. I acknowledge the youth of today who will lead us into tomorrow as our elders of the future. And I also acknowledge those ancestors that walk beside me every day to guide me to where I am today. But before I start and share a little bit about myself, which won't take too long, I'd like to acknowledge and thank my fellow board member from the Aboriginal Languages Trust, Dr. Raymond Kelly, for inviting me on behalf of the Trust to just share with you a few of the things that's happening around the Trust. And as one of the 9 board members of the Aboriginal Languages Trust, I'm just going to take you through a number of things in terms of the Act and give you a little bit of information about what the Trust plans are for the upcoming year and the future. So myself, I'm a Trindle. My family originate from Narrabri, where we're recognised as traditional owners through story, through connection that's never been broken. My grandmother on my father's side was a Rutley from Barradine, over near Coonabarabran, and my mother's mother was a McGrady, and my grandfather was a Wallace. So we've got very long, extensive networks. I'd also like to acknowledge my children's father. I have 5 sons, and the saltwater people of the Yagal and Banggi and Banggi people from the North Coast. I'm a teacher. I've been in the education department for over 30 years, but currently working with TAFE New South Wales as a product manager for Aboriginal languages for New South Wales, along with a number of other couple of things that I do. And one other thing is that in 2019, last year, I was given the humblest privilege of being a life member to the New South Wales Aboriginal Education Consultative Group. So just a little bit about me. Very proud of my 5 sons, who are all culturally competent and intelligent young men, or right across doing what they have to do in terms of connection to culture, language, song, dance, storytelling and history. One of my sons at the moment is up with Jesse, and Jesse will share where he is in a moment, doing a corroboree up in Queensland and today, so I'm very, very proud of him. Background to the Trust, for those of you who are unsure of it, and I am going to be referring to a number of my notes over here, so please forgive me. But some of you may know that on the 24th of October in 2017, the Aboriginal Languages Act for New South Wales actually became law. Quite significant achievement. This is the very first legislation in Australia to promote the significance of language to culture, Aboriginal people's identity and our social wellbeing. Significant community consultation was undertaken by Aboriginal Affairs New South Wales to inform the final content and the intent of the Act, so that it truly reflected Aboriginal language aspirations for New South Wales. It also looked at Aboriginal custodianship of Aboriginal languages as it's a fundamental principle of the Act. The New South Wales Government's role is to facilitate resource Aboriginal communities and to help develop their languages. And to enable this to happen, an Aboriginal Languages Trust has been established as part of the Act, with the objectives of providing a focused, coordinated and a sustained effort in relation to Aboriginal language activities at both a local, regional, state and, we hope, international in the future. We have a voice and we are going to share that voice with the wider of the world. The Act actually commenced on the 5th of March this year, following an extensive recruitment process, there were 9 members that were appointed to that board, including myself and Ray. We have Jason Barrett as our chairperson, Professor Lyndon Coons, Mr. Raymond Kelly, Ms. Fiona Kelly, Mr. Minette Riley, and Clark Webb. So we do extend right across New South Wales. And Tricia Ellis, yeah. So in terms of what will the Languages Act do, the importance is around language, culture and story, because it cannot be separated. It's part of who we are. It identifies us, it places us on the country. And the languages of the First Peoples of Australia are an integral part of the world's oldest living and connected Aboriginal people to their land. We are the first people on this country and across the world, as we know. So the first words that were spoken across the world were actually our voices which were heard. It still can be heard on country today. If you sit and you listen to country, country will talk to you. And I say invasion, but at the time of invasion in 1788, estimated that over 250 Aboriginal languages were spoken. And the Act actually acknowledges that as a result of those past government decisions that were indoctrinated upon us, Aboriginal languages were almost lost, but they were spoken in secret and passed on through Aboriginal communities and Aboriginal families, just the way we are, we just connect. But without the proactive work to reawaken and to grow and nurture our languages, the knowledge and the learning of our elders that came before us and are yet to come again will diminish. So it is our responsibility to ensure that languages remain where they are. Speaking and learning traditional languages improves the well-being of all of us. It provides a sense of empowerment and a sense of belonging. It cements you to a place where you feel you are connected and a place where you belong. The Aboriginal Languages Act was therefore created to acknowledge the fundamental importance of language to Aboriginal people and to our culture, and to establish an Aboriginal Languages Trust to work to continue to revitalise and to regrow the work that has happened in the past and the work that is going to continue to occur in the future. The functions of the Trust, as defined under the Act, include the promotion of language activities, really identifying priorities for language activity, managing funding, and investing in language, promoting educational opportunities and employment opportunities in language activities for the wider appreciation and engagement of our languages. The Trust will also work with other government agencies, and it's important that we do that we are not alone in a silo, because we have to share our knowledge with everyone. And by working as a trust with government agency, it also provides advice and guidance on Aboriginal languages, and such as the Geographical Names Board on the use of Aboriginal languages in the name of geographical places in New South Wales. I know when I'm travelling country and I'm moving across country, I look at places of names as I travel, and I can get an understanding of where I am by those names. But when I travel towards Armidale and up around that area, it's not a good feeling, not because it's not of the country, but because of the names that have been there, and they really do need to be changed in terms of what's up there, like Slaughterhouse Creek and Black Man's Gully and so forth. They really need to be changed. So it's an important role that we have in doing that. The role of the board is also setting strategic direction, and we're going to be leading that. And a priority for us as a board, we were appointed in March this year, and because of COVID, we have been meeting, and we have focused establishing the trust as a compliant government agency, establishing the operation and the governance structures required to set up the trust. As you would understand and appreciate, this is new, so we have to learn and grow our skills as well in this. We have developed a strategic plan, and one of those first priorities of us as a board is to develop a 5-year strategic plan to again guide, invest in, and as a guide to investment and activities in language revival in New South Wales. Revival, reclamation, revitalisation, all under the same umbrella. And under the Aboriginal Languages Act in 2017, the Trust, well, our group, we must submit to the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs that plan. And that plan will then guide the activities and the priorities until it's reviewed at the end of the 5 years. So us as board members will sit on that board for the 5-year period. The draft strategic plan incorporates feedback received from communities across statewide consultations on the Act, subsequent consultations with community language stakeholders and government agencies, including stakeholders who give feedback at the language gathering last year in 2019, and the knowledge and experience of the board. We will put that together through consultation, we'll put it out and bring it back, and we'll make sure that it's really a clear path forward. And that's where in 2021 we will be sending that out for consultation, and hopefully communities will be able to give us a clearer direction of understanding the core values, the goals and the focus areas of the trust, which we need to really focus on to ensure the good work that's occurring continues now and into the future, and it grows. Community investments. We're sitting here on a Saturday. We're invested our time, our energy and our souls into Aboriginal languages. So, you know, while the work continues to progress, the plan and the board will consider to continue and advance its activities to support, you know, functions like this so that we can grow it even further. The first of these activities, I guess, will be a launch of the Aboriginal Languages Community Investment Program in 2021. The program will provide one-off funding to eligible Aboriginal community-controlled organisations for language revitalisation under a range of categories. So we aim to accommodate or communicate the details of the program, including the total funding available, hopefully before the end of this year, and encourage any organisation or group eligible to apply to consider submitting application for the funding. Now, the program was run last year, and over $300,000 was awarded to 7 community Aboriginal organisations groups to support organisations to grow, reawaken and nurture and raise awareness of Aboriginal languages across New South Wales. So these are just some of the key priorities, I guess, and it's an important thing to note that last year was the International Year of Languages. Now we go into a decade under the UN of Indigenous language, the right to Indigenous languages, and they've designated that from 2022 until 2032 as a decade of Indigenous languages. But we know, those of us know, that languages doesn't have a time frame. Those languages have always been here, will continue to be here, but by us working together, we can ensure its growth into the future. You know, and I think that as a board member of the Aboriginal Languages Trust, we look forward to working closely with the community in 2021. And it's a shame of what's happened in terms of this year, but we have to move forward, and we have been working closely to move forward under these circumstances. And we're going to do that to develop a greater understanding of the language work that is occurring out there, what is happening out there, so that we can actually then start to set strategic directions based on community needs. Now, just a couple of these key messages, and please wave at me when my time's up, please, because I can talk all day underwater. So I guess the key messages is that languages of the First People are an integral part of the world's oldest living culture. We connect to each other, we connect to our land, we connect to the worlds around us, both seen and unseen. Speaking and learning traditional Aboriginal languages improves the well-being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people. But with proactive work, we will be able to ensure that goes further. If we just take 1 minute and reflect on how far that we have come from a government who told us historically and enforced us not to speak language, to now we have a government who has acknowledged that, yes, Aboriginal languages and Torres Strait Islander languages were the first languages spoken on this country within New South Wales. And we have an act. And that act then ties them to their commitment to ensuring that we are funded to continue the work that we are so vitally doing across all spaces. Wherever you're in the university, whether you're on a community campus, whether you're on just sitting on community, it's important that we do that. Just trying to think, what else can I say here? Language is just more than a means to communicate. It is an essential characteristic that makes people's and our communities unique, and plays a central role as a sense of identity. Language also carries meanings behind words, beyond words themselves. and it is an important platform within which much cultural knowledge and heritage is shared. Speaking and learning, it empowers us. It will educationally improve the outcomes for our students when they're being taught their first languages in the early years, and that is a continuous, from the early years right through to now. Interpreting and translating language teaching and learning and producing resources in Indigenous languages or Australian languages, Aboriginal language, provide significant economic, social and intrinsic benefits to individuals and to our communities. Approximately about 100 of our languages in varying degrees are being spoken at the moment. But the risk is a lot of our elders or our people are not even living to become elders to share their stories to the future. A lot of our people are passing way too young before their story and their language can be shared. Finally, and I thank you for this opportunity to be able to be sharing this with you. And I guess for me, as I wrap up, that I'd say to you, Gabaninda Ninyani, Gawale Yaladu Malin Naya. Thank you for allowing me to speak my language, my country, to you in the way that we are meeting today. So, Yalu, and I'll be sticking around to hear Jessie. So.
Thank you, Catherine, for that, and to give an insight for what I think most of the students can't really or don't really have a sight into normally. That's a thing for Auntie Sharon and Uncle Ray to worry about rather than us.
I think we all play a part in trying to get there.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to open up the Q&A session with something that everyone's kind of touched on today, but kind of what has brought each and every one of you into the language space?
I think for me, I used to work in health, and I always wanted to try to help make a difference in Aboriginal people's health outcomes. I had a lot of brothers pass away way too young, so I moved into health to try to bridge that gap a bit. In seeing that, I started moving forward through to find out how we can better approach it from our own point of view, and seeing what language can do for our people in regards to identities, self-determination. That's the sort of thing that really drove me into this space. Yeah, it's not about me, it's about all of us as a whole mob. Yeah.
For entirely personal reasons. That was, I suppose it was about maintaining that connection with my mum and my family, and I was just on a mission. I just had to get that tattoo translated for my nephew. Yeah, yeah, different mission. Yeah. I had to get that tattoo translated for my nephew, and it just sort of, it just grew from there. Yeah.
I think both, like personal and academic, because personal, just trying to find out about my family, and then that jumping over to sign languages, not like Auslan or American sign languages and other sign languages that were imported to those countries, but wanting to find out what was here already, and then little bit by little bit finding out, wow, whole new field of about sign languages that really hadn't been touched on much I know a lot of it, funding and all that's been focused on spoken languages of Indigenous communities, but very, very, very little on Indigenous sign languages. So I think I went to a conference at the ANU, the Dynamics of Languages, and there's a little bit of talk about sign languages, and I thought, well, not many people seem to know much about it, and I had a passion for sign languages, so I just started researching more, and mine's only secondary sources, really. I haven't done any field research or anything like that, but the more I explore, the more that, it's like a bottomless well. Yeah. It keeps going down, so
it's a nice little
just need other people to help out, so yeah.
I might just jump in here, right?
So just real quickly, look, I came here, I got into the languages for purely personal reasons. I wanted to improve my language work in terms of my performance. It was my bread and butter at one point. That's the only way it's where I was, it's where I was making money. But in truth, looking back, I think all the way along I've been sick of asking this question, why? Why was it broke? What happened to this? Who did this? Why did they do it? Why became the reason why I think I'm here. I don't want to keep asking why. I just want to go, okay, that connects to this makes sense to that. And so in terms of researching within language, being sick of asking the question why.
Yeah, I think my view on this is that my great-grandmother was part of the stolen generation, loss of culture, and it was kind of a way that, because my family doesn't know much about our culture, it was a way to have an external source teach me about a neighbouring language group and kind of reconnect with community within Newcastle where I've grown up. So, yeah. Jesse?
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Beauty. Yamagaro Mati on Jesse Ngiampa Waradri, mate. Yeah, I'm a Ngiampa Waradri person, man. I'm up here in the Banggi Mountains, which is a bit random. There's a big corroboree going on here, so I'm kind of lucky that we've been invited up. Ngiampa have been invited up from the local Waka Waka groups, and there's people from all over the place here, like the Nunako Yagara, the Morawari, Warrabindam over here. So sorry I can't be there today with you, but it's good that I can sort of sit in between two places here, technology. The way I kind of, language for me, how I sort of fell into it, and I guess that's the good way to explain it, sort of falling into it on a pathway, is I've grown up as a musician, and a singer and a guitarist and things. And I did a music degree and a teaching degree, but I've always been really intrigued. I've always felt good speaking language. As a musician, me speaking language feels like music to me. You know those same feelings that you get when you hear a good song, or you hear a song that's special to you. Speaking language is like that for me. So, and especially when I'm speaking my ancestral language, I always like to see it as a chain, ancestral chain that we're connected to as Aboriginal people. That's been there from the start, from the Murapa, from the dreaming. And when I'm learning my language and speaking my language, I feel like I'm joining that chain again. I'm joining that ancestral chain. And I feel right in myself and feel right in my spirit. So when I finished my music degree, I was sort of just floating around as trying to make money off music. And but once I started to get a bit of a focus on relearning my language again, because I was only, as a lot of your stories are, you've got bits and pieces, but we've got to do the work to relearn and revitalise our language. So as I started to relearn my language again, I started with Wiradjuri because that was kind of where my mother and my nan grew up, but really our ancestral line runs out even further west in the Ngamba country. But I started with Wiradjuri, Uncle Stan Grant's material, and then I just started doing my teaching degree, met Uncle Ray at Wallatuka, and sort of connected with him and saw his methods of listening to the tapes, So that really helped me when I started thinking, okay, I'll listen to these old people on the tapes. And then that's where it really took off, because I guess as a musician, you've got to have a good ear. So listening to tapes of old people speak and having a good ear has really helped me connect with that, connect with the sounds. And then, yeah, so there's a couple of old fellows out west that said the same thing, you know, like, said, if you want to learn our language, there's not really any fluent speakers, and you can read the material, but the best thing to do is get tapes from my access, you know, about people speaking. So yeah, it was Uncle Ray that was saying that, and then one of my other old fellows out there, Uncle Paul Rawdon, said the same thing, and I thought, well, that makes sense. So once I started listening to them tapes, and then giving it back to Aaron Mob too, it just really made it much easier to connect with it. I was hearing old songs on these tapes. Now I think, have you guys seen that? I'm a bit not sure. Have you guys seen that video already of me doing the presentation? Has that already happened?
Yeah.
I don't want to repeat myself. So, yeah, as I said, there's something about them songs.
Jesse,
Yo.
I want to ask what's going on with that air.
I don't know, I'm out bush camping. Why?
Yeah.
What, like today or in general?
just with the wind there. We're just running short of time, Bingo. That's why I'm trying to.
The wind, yeah, it was a bit windy. I think it's died down now.
We're just running a bit of short of time there. We need to listen to Sister Kathy there now.
Okay.
Politely,
no worries.
Politely.
Are we on the? Yeah, no worries. We move. We're not on the panel yet.
Yeah, we're doing quick questions.
Okay. Moving on then.
Good on you, Jess.
Thanks, guys.
You want to ask it, Catherine?
So, Catherine, what kind of made you fall into the language space?
When I was born. And I mean that, I guess, but yeah, anyway. I grew up around language. I'm learning my language, and I'll continue to learn my language. I'm a very, I've got the all plates on. I'm beginning, I'm learning. But I'm very fortunate to have been surrounded by it. Growing up, I heard it, didn't acknowledge it. I was there. It lived around me. And then as you grow up and you get older and you get wiser, and you think to yourself, hey, I know that. And now I'm really at times think, I really wish I would have sat and heard and listened a lot more to those stories. But my father was a brilliant storyteller. So he would tell me yarns around the campfires because he was a drover. My mum and dad were drovers, so we lived on the road. And a lot of it was storytelling and meeting people as we went across country. And, you know, and there was an old Murray man that he was part of I guess it was the police, the black police that used to go out and about, and trackers, and he became a really good friend of my parents, and he was able to speak several different languages, so I heard the languages all the time. But as I've grown, I just love it. And I'm learning not only from academically, but I'm also learning from story. I learn from people. I learn from my sons. My sons teach me, and I teach them. They teach me. I'll share with you. My important thing about language is that this is for me personally. Anyone can speak it fluently, but unless you know the knowledge and you know the connection of what you are speaking about and why, language has a purpose, then it's really just being able to repeat copious lots of words. So if I ask my sons or an uncle or an auntie or an elder in the community, what's the name of that tree, they never tell me the name of the tree. They tell me the story of the tree. They tell me the purpose of the tree. They tell me the connection to the tree. And at the very, very end, they will then tell me the name of the tree. Because if I remember the story, I remember its name and it places it there. So that's how I've learned language, through story.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I think just because of time, we'll move to, I guess...
Use some of that.
Yeah.
That's your job.
Move to the kind of why we're here today, and that's because of the future generations and where we can go with language, and kind of to blend in the next question, the other questions as well. But what are our next steps forward, and what resources can we use to then build up the next generation of speakers to make their life easier, since there has been a gap between teaching and fluent speakers. So a kind of loaded question, but...
I think for me, where it sits with me is just exploration, not putting a limit on what we can think around in regards to language, like how we've done it a little bit today, bringing Jesse and Rodney in to give their presentations on their exploration, to how they explored through their own sources of language. I think for me it is opening up all them communication levels that Indigenous people had, and exploring how they play a role within the spoken language as well, and how best they all support one another. And being open to that idea that one does not outweigh the other. They all play a vital role in making communication as a whole. Yeah.
Anyone want to go from there?
I think with sign language in particular, the United Nations put out a declaration back in 2018 and said, okay, 23rd of September is the International Day of Sign Languages. So that's sort of given sign languages a platform, whereas before it's just sort of fell through the gaps or it wasn't unheard of. So now that we've got that platform, we've sort of been building up our profile, and you've noticed that like New Zealand Prime Minister, uses her interpreter by her side, and that didn't happen until this year in Australia. With the bushfires, the COVID, we've had more sign language exposure on TV. So I think that's probably been why with that declaration, and now we've just got to focus a little bit more on Indigenous sign languages and make sure they're not forgotten too.
Yeah. Just on the sign language side of things, is there anywhere that participants from today, either in person or online, can go to kind of put their foot into the world of sign language?
That's a difficult one, that one. There's plenty out there, but I think it's mostly colonial sign languages, like Auslan and American Sign Languages and all that. They've got their platform, they've been around for a while. But I think Indigenous sign languages have been under radar for a long time, so I think all people that work with Indigenous languages need to build that profile like we've done today and keep building that and we'll see how it goes.
Just keep on making it accessible. Just keep on, keep on making it accessible. And I mean, people might not be willing to take it up now, but they should always be offered the opportunity. So, yeah.
I was asked a question last week, and what does language give me? Language gives me intellectual freedom. I can look at material and I can make sense of it in my own way, but unless I'm conversing with somebody in a way that is a two-way street, I'm just talking to myself. But it does give you intellectual freedom, and we've got to be prepared for that, and we've got to pass that baton on. So when you're looking to elders, you can look for a little while, but it's time not to look there and start looking within yourself and become the leaders. We can still be here.
I think that's one of the things I've got from you this year, Ray, is that I can be confident in myself to think my way around where we go. And I think everybody's capable of that as well.
Chuck it up to you,
So So what was the question?
So what's our next steps forward within the space of language, and possibly chucking in what resources we could develop or would be good?
I guess it's about, like, probably the most effective thing I've seen is creating the connections for us to actually be able to do it. Yeah, I mean, like, through all facets, you know, these Zoom things are good. Being able to meet up in communities, whatever ways we can do to actually get together to share it. Because as Unc said, you know, otherwise we're just talking ourselves. So, as I said before, accessing the sound files is really important because, like I said, that's, in terms of a revitalisation, that's where the language is, from them old speakers. Yeah, so creating them connections for us to get together, not just big, like what we're doing now, but not just big sort of talk sessions from you know, government officials and saying they're going to help us. But the more we all get to talk together, the easier it'll become.
And Catherine?
Yeah, I'd agree with those following comments too, and I think it's the important thing is to just continually acknowledge that language has never gone away. It's always there, and it's up to you and your communities to be able to find that journey where that takes you. And there's no wrong, there's no right. Aboriginal languages is political, and I'll put it out there. It's political for lots of reasons. But what we have to do if we want to continue this journey is to acknowledge that, find your purpose in terms of why you want to do this language journey, and go for it. No holds back. Just have those conversations with community. Don't exclude people from the conversation. Everyone has different opinions. Value what they have got to say based on their experiences, and then work on a way to move forward. From a trust perspective, I think it's important that you all engage with our strategic plan that is going out there, because that will then allow us to prepare it for the future for the next 5 years. Is the resourcing a problem because we can't access accessible funding or appropriate funding based on different criteria? Let us know. Let us know what the gaps are out there in the community when this strategic plan goes out there. What are the core values of, we have core values as a trust that we're working with. And even though I'm sitting here today as a representative of the trust, which I am just in awe of being a part of such an amazing group of people, such as, alumni, like Ray there in front of me, like it's incredible. But I also come from a very grounded place. I come from a very grounded place in terms of knowing my identity, knowing my connection, knowing where I belong. And if you have your voice in yourself to be able to ask those hard questions, you'll often get knocked down. But as soon as you get knocked down, you've got to get back up again. You've got to keep building it, because it's important that our languages remain and are embedded in every space that we can think of. Look what's out there, go for it, Whether it's from a university perspective, it's a community perspective, is it through dance, is it through song, is it through anything? It's there, it's up to you. I can't tell you to find that, but it's up to you to go onto that journey as a group to be able to find it.
Amazing, thank you. So I think that wraps up us on time. On behalf of Wallatuka and the Muuya Banggi program, I'd like to thank each and every one of you that attended in person, but also attended online. I'd also like to thank the Wonnarua language program, and also yourself, Rodney, for coming and presenting today. And also thank you, Catherine and Jesse, for sending presentations and coming in on Zoom. So yeah, I'd like to put my round of applause together for everyone, because without without you, this wouldn't happen. So thank you.
And just while are we still on? While we're still thanking people, I'd like to thank David. I think he's done an amazing job today. Good on you, brother. Yeah. So,
and of course, we want to thank our technicians. An old actor always looks to the technicians and say thank you for your contribution today.
And making it possible.
And of course to Raquel and Shane and any and the student body who always contribute. They're always here, yeah, Dan, for us. Yeah. So thanks everybody. We do have some gifts that we're going to hand out, but we don't have to do that online. Sister Kathy, thanks very much for coming and doing what you do so wonderfully. And we'll see you all very, very soon, eh?
Yeah.
Hello.
We'll do it again.
We'll
do it again.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.